Sorry.
Ladies in person. And we have our president, Tania Kuntz, who is going to be presiding. I'm co-facilitating here in person. This is our hybrid setup meeting that we've been blessed to be able to do. We're going to be talking later this year, maybe after this meeting if there's time, but increasingly we're looking at adjusting our ways of how we meet so that it's comfortable for everyone and everyone feels like they're getting what they want out of the meetings, whether in person, whether online. Because when we're totally online, I'm just gonna opening up, this is our first meeting of the year. This is something that we've been toying with, but if we're totally online, we're a different kind of organization than community-based because there's so much going on in Nashville, and our Black community is changing. It's much more dissected, and so those of us who grew up here remember a core Black community. Mostly people think of Black Nashville as North Nashville. However, there was always a Black South Nashville, even before Black North Nashville. And the Black community pretty much exploded here after the Civil War. There were a few that were here, like less than 1,000 around that number. Before the Civil War, Blacks who lived in Nashville, pre-Civil War, and then after the Civil War, the population like tripled. So, but our core communities are no more, and we have different communities. There are still a core Black community in North Nashville. There's still, people who've lived most of their lives in East Nashville, but less so. And our elders are the generation of people that know that remember that. And I count myself in that as well, because Nashville's not the same as it was. And so we're adjusting as a city in terms of claiming our Black community, connecting our Black community, keeping it connected, so that the format of our meetings will be a task that we will be addressing in the early weeks of our beginning of our program year. So I just wanted to open up with that. I will talk later about that as well, about the format of our meetings and about the changing Black community in Nashville. So Tania may have did you have something that you wanted to share in the beginning of this meeting?
I do. First, would you like to introduce yourself, Natalie?
Oh, okay. My mind is so full. Good morning, everyone. My name is Natalie Bell. I am the board chair of programs. Not the chair of the board, but I'm a board member who plans our programs. And so I've been a member of the Nashville chapter since I first moved back here. That was in 2017. Tania has been a member long before that as well. There are about, I think, maybe 10 or 12 members who are longtime members who are active in the membership now. But we have a lot of new members. Our president, Tania, is very active on social media and attracting people through the presentations that she gives with various genealogy-related organizations, and then she keeps our social media active, posting and so forth. And so we have a lot of members who find us through social media. And so we're working to balance that so everybody feels like they're getting their needs served. All right, Tania?
Yes. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Tania Kuntz. As Nally said, I am the chapter president for AAHGS Nashville, have been a member since 2012. I also serve on the national board of the national organization. I'm the national treasurer, and I'm so delighted that you could all be with us today for our AAHGS Nashville chapter meeting. I do want to share that we have a sign-in sheet and digital handout, and this is just helpful as another mechanism for just letting us know that you were in attendance today. And also we have a question about how we can better serve you. So that's always nice to get feedback from attendees about things they're looking to get out of our AAHGS Nashville chapter meetings. So I have a QR code here for those that are in the room. If you'd like to scan the QR code, if you are an online attendee, I have put the link in the chat. So you'll be able to access that, sign in, and then you'll get an email with the digital handout, which has just a few resources and links that accompany what we'll hear about today. So I welcome you. And let's see, let me go ahead and advance my slide. And let's see, hold on, this isn't advancing, right? There we go, agenda. So let me go over today's agenda, what we're going to be doing today. So our last meeting, we had our show and tell just a few weeks ago. And one of the ideas that came from that is to have more regular show and tell from our members throughout the year. So we have Vanessa with us today, who's going to talk with us briefly about discoveries she had in her own family research, because these are helpful ways of just sharing with each other, inspiring each other. Then we are delighted to going to be able to hear from our guest speaker, Betsy Phillips, today about her work for her book, Dynamite Nashville. Then we have a few announcements, and then pending time, because we don't want to keep everyone too long, we have some AAHGS Nashville chapter specific things to cover and share. So that's the agenda we'll follow today. And Nally, if we're okay, I'd love to start by inviting Vanessa up. We've got her slides, and we can hear from her about her family discoveries.
Okay, like Tania said, I was asked to give a short presentation on my geological discovery. So I've entitled this, How I Found My Second Great-Grandfather and His Enslavers.
Are we seeing, is everyone seeing Vanessa?
So we can see you in the room, yes.
Okay, that's the audience.
Right.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people here today. Fantastic. And then we have how many online?
Oh, we have 17 online.
Okay, all right, fantastic. All right, now I'm going to put the camera here on Vanessa for her show and tell.
Yes, we can see her great. And are y'all seeing Vanessa's slides okay?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. This family line is my mother's paternal side, the Hancocks, and the Hancock is my mother's maiden name. You can advance the slides for me, please.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So, step one was I gathered everything I knew. The oral history was very good on this side of my family. I knew family names. I have a cousin who knew a lot of family history. So I took those names that I was aware of and found them in the different censuses and death certificates. And I was able to find the connections in those records. So everything fit together, everything made common sense. So I was able to backtrack and found that my great-grandfather was named Dan Hancock. There was 2 things I knew. I really wanted to find who was the enslaver of my great-grandfather, second great-grandfather. So the 2 things I knew was they were from Cannon County, Tennessee, and I was pretty certain they took the enslaver's surname of Hancock. So what I did was I went to the 1860 slave schedule, And I was able to find 5 enslavers that had the surname of Hancock. I did process of elimination. So I was able to eliminate Martha Hancock and R.M. Hancock. And why I was able to eliminate them is because my second great grandfather had about 12 children. So by the time the 1860 census rolled around, about 5 or 6 of them were born by then. So that's the reason why I was able to eliminate them. Now with step 3, what I did was, in my steps, I'm probably overstepping a lot of steps involved for the sake of time. So I'm not gonna go through every step I did, but my subsequent research showed that R.A., whose name was Richard, if you notice that in the 1860 census, they was always just their initials, no full names. But in my subsequent research, I found out that R.A. was Richard, A.L. was Alfred Lewis, and C.C. was Christopher Cooper. Richard is the father of A.L., which is Alfred Lewis, and Christopher Cooper. So they were all the same family. Okay, so I figured that out. Let's go to step 4. Can you? Okay, so by me finding out those Hancocks were the same family, I still wanted more concrete evidence that they actually enslaved my second great grandfather and some of his offspring. So what I did was I went to the Facebook. And let me explain a little about the Facebook. Facebook has a lot of genealogical groups. The one I make sure I'm a member of all the groups that I am researching. So Cannon County has one group. It's called Cannon County Geographers Chat. So what I did was, just by chance, I just went ahead and made a posting on that particular group. So what I did was, I'm paraphrasing this. I asked them, are there any descendants of Richard Hancock and Alfred Lewis and Christopher Cooper Hancock? I just did a shot in the dark, just see what I would get, what kind of response I would get. But someone had responded to my post, and they said that you need to get this book called Searching for Emily. This is a book that is a compilation of Black history records for Cannon County, Tennessee. So, and this was a goldmine when I found this book, because when I look on what page is it? When I look on one of these pages, when I look on this page, it says, Cannon County, Deed Books E, page 184, John Martin to Richard Hancock, a man slave named Daniel, about 20. So what happened was, I don't know who John Martin is, but I did a lot of research, and I was able to backtrack that my second great grandfather was originally enslaved by a Richard Butcher. And Richard Butcher had passed away and got caught, and my second great grandfather's enslavement, it was a big court case about his enslavement that went all the way to the Tennessee Supreme Court. So I was able to figure out, I was able to do a timeline and find out who owned my second great grandfather. So I was able to find out that he was deeded to Richard Hancock for $600. I was able to come to some reasonable conclusions of his enslavement, and the paper trail was really, really good on him. I was able to work myself back and figure out his timeline. Tania, can you go to the next slide?
Yes, yes.
Okay. This is just the census records that showed him my second great grandfather and his offspring in the 1870 census. Thank you. Next slide, Tania.
Okay.
So this is the timeline I came up with for my second great grandfather. He was born about 1825, and his first enslaver was Richard Butcher. He was gifted to Elizabeth Kersey, which is Richard Butcher's daughter, in 1841. In 1841, enslaver Richard Butcher passes away. After that, there was a lengthy court case about his enslavement. For whatever reason, there were some individuals who said that Richard Butcher owed a debt, and they were trying to collect it by obtaining Daniel. So that happened between 1841 through 1845. Eventually, the Supreme Court ruled in their favor of the estate, and I will overstep some steps here, but eventually I found that Daniel was deeded from Richard Hancock for $600 from John Martin. John Martin is another son-in-law of Richard Butcher. Okay, Richard Butcher and Richard Hancock are two separate people. That happened in December 3rd, 1845. Richard Hancock died intestate in 1855. Even though Richard Hancock died intestate, there were still some documents that actually showed what they did in the estate of Richard Hancock. So Richard Hancock died intestate in 1855, most likely enslaved by C.C. Hancock. Once Richard Hancock passed away in 1855, I saw some documents that indicated most likely that transferring of the enslavement of my second great grandfather was to C.C. Hancock, just based on the number of slaves he had at that time. Daniel probably passed away between 1891 and 1900. I don't have no absolute concrete evidence of that, but of course the 1890 census is non-existent. The documents that I found indicated that he most likely passed away between 1890 and 1900. So that's my genealogy story. I wish the other lines of my family was as easy to trace like this one was, but it was not. I mean, I have a lot of regrets in my family lines, but I do recommend others to get on Facebook, because if I had not made that posting on that particular Facebook group, I would have never known about this book. I make sure that I'm a member of all of the genealogical groups that's on Facebook are county specific. So there are other people who are researching that particular county in that particular group. So I make sure I'm a member of Cannon County. Smith County is one that I'm researching, DeKalb County and Rutherford County. So that's okay. Like I said, I wish other family lines in my family were that easy to trace, but not all of them are. So
well, thank you so much, Vanessa, for sharing.
Can we ask questions?
Yeah, we have time for maybe one or two questions. Yes.
You're running away.
Right.
I was going to ask you because your explanation of how you went through this, and I've done some similar things in my family, but sounds academic. But I'm sitting here thinking back when you were talking, thinking about the ancestors whose names I know, who were enslaved. And like you said, somebody was deeded. Those kinds of words. How does that make you, or how did you feel when you were doing this research? Because I know the first time I had to roll back into the 1860 slave schedule, I was in tears because I knew who I was, looking for, kind of, but there's an emotional component for it for me, because I'm thinking, okay, you know how you read about people carrying these feelings from the ancestors and stuff? I feel that for you, and I don't even know these people, because when you said somebody was deeded, and I'm looking at the image that you have up there, that just brings some sadness and some pride at the same time that these people survived those times. And here you are standing here, a free woman, on the area where we had people fight for the freedom so we could be free. So I was just wondering, how did you, what was the emotional part of it when you were going through this research?
It does become emotional, but my quest is to uncover, our ancestors want to be found.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely, it's my quest. I'm probably the only person in my family who takes this on,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm determined to find all the information. It does become emotional, but I try to set that aside for a moment and find my ancestors.
So you can call their names.
Huh?
I said, then we can call their names.
Oh yeah. Actually, I have a family reunion coming up June. On another side of my family, not this particular side. It's my quest that we are naming all of our people. We're having a libation ceremony where we call all of the names during the memorial service. So that's what we plan on doing. But yeah, it does become emotional. But I try to make it my quest to I won't say not to think about it, but it's my quest to bring their stories to light.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
What I think is beautiful,
No,
I'm sorry, but you pointed you. But I just want to say what I think is beautiful about your story is that you brought humanity and individuality
Yes.
to this person who he wasn't just an enslaved person. He was an individual who had his own. Like, what happened? Like, my first question is, and I know, like, the rabbit hole I would be going down is what was going on with him between 1841 and 1845 while folks were fighting over who got to have it.
Working.
Like who? Yeah, but who for who? Like which person? Which person?
Yeah, like I said, I stopped for time's sake. I probably skipped a lot of steps.
Oh no, I did.
But he
That's
was
beautiful what you did.
Oh, okay. But yeah, he was. There was it was a lengthy court battle over for Rebecca who enslaved him. They went all the way to the Supreme Court. I think that brings
Supreme Court records are a wonderful resource.
Oh, yes, they are. Yes, they are. In the court records, it showed where one of the potential enslavers took him to Texas to hide him. I did not bring this up, but Texas to hide him.
You did kind of find out some of the stuff.
Yeah, I did. Yes, I did find out some of the stuff. But for time's sake, I just kind of gave you the overview of how I did it. Yeah.
Thank you for answering my curiosity.
Okay. Hey.
You did an excellent job.
Did I?
And
okay.
Yes, and I would say it's not easy. You made it look easy.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your commitment.
Oh.
It's an example to everybody.
Okay.
You never know who's watching.
True.
Especially the next gen. I'm kind of going to piggyback off of this young lady's comments, because I wonder, in your research, did you find, this is not the only reason, because I am not in any way trying to imply that your great grandfather was just he's a man, first of all. But I wonder, what was his skill set? Because sometimes that was part of what it's looked at as a asset, a business. It's the same. And I wondered if that was in the court records. Were you aware of it? Also, I wondered about his biological line. I don't know if you've done DNA testing, but was he the actual family of these owners? It looks like he was traded 3 times. He had 3 different owners of the same cluster. So I wondered about those when you were going through. I know there were some things that you didn't talk about. I just wondered if.
Yeah, we did. I've done DNA testing to backtrack that he was so I do collateral research. I look at all of the descendants backwards and forwards. So there's like 1,000 some people in my family tree that's on Ancestry. So I do the research do a lot of collateral research. I'm sorry, did you have?
Was he, I don't know. My question,
What was
was he actually a Hancock or not? Was he in that family network?
In the beginning, he was a butcher. Because he was, this is what I would think. His original enslaver was Richard Butcher. And then Richard Butcher passed away. And then it looks like he was deeded to Elizabeth Kersey. But Elizabeth Kersey's spouse, back then, any property of the woman became her spouse's. Okay.
I think the question you're asking is, are you genealogically related to the Butchers?
Was he?
Oh, no. Oh.
So is that kind of what
I was curious to see what your matches were. If you had done, do you have some matches to them? I just out of curiosity.
To the Butchers,
Hancocks, any of the owners.
You talking about the enslavers?
Yes.
Oh, no. Okay. I have not found that I'm a DNA match to the enslaver.
Okay.
About the battle, and I wondered if that was part of what the battle was. Sometimes it is. Sometimes there's other things that are going on. But I just think it's curious that you had that window of time and that documentation.
Oh, okay.
And study. And cool. Again, hats off to you. This is awesome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was once I got this book right here, and then I was able to find all that documentation. It was pretty easy to. The paper trail was real good. Where I could follow him and actually come up with a timeline of his life.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the book?
Sure.
Who wrote the book?
Sure.
Okay.
This book is called Searching for Emily, a compilation of Black history records for Cannon County, Tennessee. This lady basically went through all of the records regarding African Americans and compiled it into one book. Her name is, this says compiled by R.L. Murray, the Cannon County Cemeteries Project. So it has
Cemetery Project.
Okay. Yes, it has draft records. It has information about census. It has information about bills of sales, deeds. I just happened to be looking through this book and found his name. And so, this is the name of the book. I don't know if anybody's researching Cannon County, but this would be a good book to get if you are.
It is a good book, yeah. And you found out about it on Facebook.
Yeah. Like I said, I am a member of several Facebook communities or groups, and that are geared towards genealogical. Whoever's researching that particular county. I know Cannon County has one, Smith County has one, Rutherford County has one, DeKalb County has one. I think it's called, the one I was, Cannon County Genealogical Chat is the name of the group that got me into this book.
Okay. You said our ancestors want to be heard. I thought that was a very powerful statement.
Okay.
Do you want to expound on that? What you mean by that?
Oh, okay. All right. I've heard that some people can only name their grandparents' name, maybe their great grandparents' name, but they can't name their great grandparents' name or second great grandparents' name. So they want to be heard. They want their stories to be known. They want their stories to be heard. They want The spirit lives on in their descendants.
Yes.
So it's my quest to let my ancestors be known and heard through me. So I know my daughter gets tired of me talking about family history, but I want to talk to her as long as I got breath in my body about our ancestors. So that's my take on that.
Great. Well, Vanessa, your work is a very clear example of the process that we go through in trying to research our ancestors. So thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. All right. Great.
Okay, I want to remind everyone, first of all, thank you, Vanessa Hall, for sharing your genealogy research. That's what we're all about in this organization. We're researching our African-American ancestors, documenting their history, family history, family historians, and we have to do the research and then talk to the family members as well. So AAHGS Nashville, that's what we are. Thank you so much. I want to remind everybody to please sign in. There's a sign-in sheet back there. There's also the digital sign-in.
Yes.
That we have.
I'll project that. Yeah. One second.
There's a QR code on the digital sign-in. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to move on to our program. Okay, this is our first meeting of 2025, AAHGS Nashville. Our topic today, how can we help Nashville heal from its legacy of racial terror? I'm sure that some of you have heard the stories of a family member that was run out of town. Something happened and we never heard from them again. Stories of terror, and this reverberates in the African-American experience, is the terror that some of our family members have experienced. And right here in Nashville, as you all know, we were a center of civil rights activity, and it did not go without terror. Our author today, who's going to speak on that subject, is Betsy Phillips. A lot of you may be aware that she writes for the Nashville Scene. She has a column called Pith in the Wind. And a lot of us like to think of her as the conscience of Nashville, talking about subjects that often don't get talked about. It just kind of passes on by. But she has written a book about who was responsible for the bombings that took place in civil rights era Nashville, the late 1950s and early 60s, and talked to some of the people that were suspects and their family members. Such valuable work. And I want to say that we're just pleased to have her here as our speaker for our first meeting of the year. She's just a dear friend and historian, fellow writer, means so much to this city. Betsy.
All right, how do I switch back to my slides?
Okay.
So she has to share a screen. There you go. Wait a minute. No,
Nope.
is that it? No, that's it.
Well, yeah, but
Okay.
that I think is just showing us. I don't think it's
Right.
showing.
So you need to share on your side. So there should be a share button if you hover down to the bottom of the screen. And then it's going to ask you what you want to share. So you select the presentation.
It is.
And then you'll actually hit the share button.
Okay. Share.
All right. Oh, no, we're seeing the wrong screen. Okay, now we're seeing your slides. And if you want to put it in reader mode, it's going to be one of the buttons down the bottom right corner. You should see 4 buttons, that third button. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
All right.
You
Now
were
we see your slides.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. So I gave this talk at the African American History Conference 2 weeks ago, and Natalie asked me to share it also with y'all. And thank you again, you guys, so much for having me. This is very meaningful to me. So wrote this over the holidays before the inauguration, where I need to advance. Where Elon Musk threw a Nazi salute on live television twice, and before Jocelyn Correa Escalante was murdered by a Nazi in the cafeteria at Antioch High School. So when I came back to my draft before the conference, it really seemed to miss the point. Here's what I want to say. In 1956, Vanderbilt professor Donald Davidson, the leader of the Tennessee Federation for Constitutional Government, perfected the means of taking money from rich white Nashville racists and funneling it to groups like the Ku Klux Klan to support their terrorist activities, while the rich racists stayed behind the scenes. That year, racists rioted over in Clinton, Tennessee, in opposition to the desegregation of Clinton High School, and Davidson sent Jack Kershaw over to bail the rioters out. Jack Kershaw, who you all probably know through that ugly statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest he carved that used to sit out along I-65, was one of the founders of the League of the South, the group of rich white racists that funneled money to white supremacists who rioted in Charlottesville in 2017. The funding mechanism that Donald Davidson perfected here in Nashville in the 1950s killed Heather Heyer 60 years later. J.B. Stoner was involved in the racist bombings that happened here in Nashville in the late 1950s and early 1960s. His other big project during this time was starting the National States Rights Party. Joseph Paul Franklin joined the National States Rights Party. He then went on a multi-state racist killing spree in which he wounded civil rights activist Vernon Jordan. He inspired racist author William Luther Pierce, who dedicated his first novel, Hunter, to Franklin. Pierce's second novel, The Turner Diaries, remains one of the most influential white supremacist texts. Timothy McVeigh had pages from the book with him when he was apprehended after the Oklahoma City bombing. And the Turner Diaries also influenced David Lane, the murderer of disc jockey Alan Burke. Lane coined the phrase white genocide and was a huge influence on the Christchurch killer, who was a huge influence on the killer of Jocelyn Correa Escalante. After Z. Alexander Looby's house blew up on April 19, 1960, the prevailing attitude in Nashville became no harm, no foul. So the city did nothing, and for a second time, I'm counting Nathan Bedford Forrest induction into the Ku Klux Klan here as the first, the city made itself the cradle of grave evil that has grown into the nightmare we currently live in. Whether you call them Confederates or white supremacists or Nazis or ethno-nationalists or whatever, the people who have worked to kill the freedom movement have been targeting Nashville all along. For much of the 20th century, the man at the center of resistance to this evil was Z. Alexander Looby. Before Z. Alexander Looby began practicing law here, Black people essentially did not have access to the justice system. And other than as tools of oppression, the state's laws did not apply to them. Black Tennesseans certainly did not have the protection of the law. After Looby, as imperfect as these gains may be, they did. And every gain he made him a bigger target to racists. So here's the simple truth. Z. Alexander Looby's home was bombed the morning of April 19, 1960. The explosion was intense enough that it blew a hole in his neighbor's house, broke all the windows in the building across the street, and caused damage as far away as Fisk University. These days, we all assume that Looby was targeted for his work with the student movement and the downtown sit-ins, but he was also working on just about every school desegregation suit in the state. Excuse me. And racists remained angry about the defeats he'd handed them in the Columbia riot cases back in the 1940s. It's not actually clear then specifically why he was targeted, other than that he was a formidable enemy of white racists. This is a picture from the Metro archives that shows the damage to Looby's house and the damage to his neighbor's house. You can see, based on the damage to the neighbor's house, that the bomb was strong enough to have blown off the front of Looby's house, thus collapsing it on him and his wife, Grafta. And you can see why that didn't happen. If you look under the brick on Looby's house, you can see the house's original wood siding. And this added layer saved the Looby's lives. This bombing, this assassination attempt, remains unsolved. Someone tried to kill a Nashville city councilman, and no one ever bothered to find out who did it. There had been 2 other racist terrorist bombings in Nashville that were also not solved. The Hattie Cotton Elementary School bombing in 1957 and the bombing of the Jewish Community Center in 1958. When I say not solved in those 2 cases, I mean it less so than in the Looby bombing. By the end of 1957, authorities knew that local Klansman Wallace Ryder and a North Alabama man named James Slim Thompson, along with an unnamed man I think was likely J.B. Stoner, were probably responsible for the school bombing. By the middle of 1958, law enforcement believed J.B. Stoner was behind the JCC bombing, possibly with the help of Wallace Ryder and his friends. If authorities had any ideas about who bombed the Looby house, they were much more tight-lipped. Still, let's talk a little bit about Ryder and Thompson. This blue dot is approximately Looby's house. And this yellow dot is where Wallace Ryder's garage was. The authorities had an informant who told them that Ryder put together bombs in that garage, which even now with all the traffic is just a 5-minute drive from Looby's house. On April 22nd, 1960, a Pearl High student, James Williams, contacted the Nashville police and reported that he had seen 2 white guys in a car with the license plate 1K4090 driving away from Looby's home right after the bombing. The officer who talked to Williams was, quote, of the opinion that he is mentally deficient, unquote. But the officer did look up who that license plate belonged to. A guy who lived at 1819 16th Avenue North, an easy enough walk from Ryder's place if someone needed to surreptitiously borrow a license plate that wouldn't be traced back to them. This is a picture from the first day of school in 1957. The man with the sign is Reverend Fred Stroud. No one seems to know who any of the other people in this picture are. But I think we're looking at one of the bombers, Slim Thompson. According to the state fire marshal, who had been investigating the Klan because he suspected them of insurance fraud, Thompson lived down in North Alabama just outside of Florence, but he had family here in Nashville. The fire marshal described him as height, 6 foot, weight about 150 pounds, complexion red, eyes blue, hair brown, is of thin build, has his left thumb, left index, and middle fingers missing or amputated as a result of a dynamite cap explosion when he was 10 years old. The state fire marshal had an informant who told him that Wallace Ryder had said that Ryder could drive about 120 miles, get Thompson, bring him up here, let him do a job, dynamite or whatever, let him do that job, and then in 6 hours could have him back in Alabama. This guy is missing those fingers on his right, not his left hand. But I really wonder if we're not looking into the eyes of Slim Thompson the day he bombed Hattie Cotton. In 1958, the FBI got a tip from a man in Alabama claiming that racist leader John Casper was trying to hire him to assassinate a Black Nashville city councilman named Frank Looby. The name of the tipster is redacted, but the FBI did note that they decided the informant was crazy and the tip wasn't worth following up on. Fortunately, we don't know of anyone from Alabama who came to Nashville to do the dirty work of, right. Okay, well, good job, FBI. Here's a wild thing that I learned while doing this research. Mayor Ben West led the investigation into the Looby bombing. He was at the scene that morning. He interviewed witnesses and collected evidence. He was the mayor, and he ran the investigation. Every time I think about the fact that the mayor would have had to leave North Nashville at about the same time as the silent marchers in order to be at City Hall to meet them, it blows my mind. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to go back to that jerk. When the mayor interviewed Fisk's night watchman, the people present in the room with him were the chief of police, the chief of detectives, and Avon Williams, Looby's law partner. Now, I can't believe that if you ever thought there was a chance of bringing Looby's bombers to court, that you'd have the mayor lead the investigation, with the law partner of the victim right beside him. Even stranger, when I was going over the FBI file on the Looby bombing, I realized there's no mention of the mayor's involvement in the investigation in the file. But doesn't that seem like the kind of thing that J. Edgar Hoover, consummate political animal who wanted dirt on everybody, doesn't it seem like this would be the kind of thing he would want to know about? So why didn't he? This got me thinking. I knew that relations between the FBI and the Nashville police had been very damaged by the FBI's behavior during the Hattie Cotton investigation. Namely, they withheld witnesses from the Nashville police and failed to tell the police that they had credible evidence that racists were going to blow up a school before it happened. What if that relationship had never been repaired? What if Nashville was hiding the scope of the Looby investigation? Heck, even hiding who was doing the investigating from the FBI. This brings us back to the Hattie Cotton school bombing back on September 10th, 1957. Hattie Cotton had one Black student that first day of school, Patricia Watson, and very few people outside of the school even realized she was there because she hadn't registered beforehand. So there were no violent white mobs at the school when she got there, and only a handful of protesters later in the day. Meaning, in essence, when Nashville woke up a few hours after the bombing, as far as everyone knew, a white school had been bombed. Before that day, the only white people who were deliberately targeted and harmed by white racists were white people who either were or were perceived to be sympathetic to Black people. The unspoken deal white racial terrorists made with the rest of white society was, stay out of it and you won't be hurt. But after that bombing, white Nashville suddenly and shockingly knew that racists would harm them too. Meanwhile, and I'm making a very long story short, the FBI was withholding witnesses and hiding vital information. And even if Nashville didn't know all of what the FBI was doing, as the investigation into the Hattie Cotton bombing went on, it became apparent that the FBI and the Nashville police had different goals for how the investigation would resolve. And then the FBI told the Nashville police that they had an informant in with these racial terrorists who had given them the name of two of the bombers. That informant was Frank Kuchin. And here's the problem with Frank. Of all of the people whose names have come up during the police investigations, from the guy who owned the garage to the guy missing his fingers to Frank here, only one of them had ties to crooked cops and to previous bombings. Frank. To put it in more plain terms, it's like if the Nashville police were investigating a break-in at Christie's Cookies, and the FBI was like, our informant Cookie Monster says that Wallace Ryder and Slim Thompson did it. It's going to be really hard to get a conviction on anyone other than Cookie Monster, you know? So place yourself in the position of the Nashville police then after the Looby bombing. They have 2 other unsolved bombings. They know the FBI has an informant who is very close to the bombers, and they know that there are interstate aspects to both previous cases, at the least because of Slim Thompson coming in from Alabama and J.B. Stoner coming in from Georgia. And yet the FBI has been repeatedly declining to become more involved in these investigations. Is the FBI refusing to get involved in order to protect their informant? Okay, but now Nashville has an assassination attempt on a sitting US politician, and the most likely suspects are an FBI informant and his friends. Should the Nashville police have any trust in the FBI? It's unclear if these 3 men were still in the Ku Klux Klan during the time of the bombings. They had been, but at least Ryder had become disillusioned because he was pouring all this time and money into racial terrorism, and few others were helping. But it's not clear that Huchin or Thompson were out. And the reason that's important is because a Klan member could not undertake bombings or murders without the permission of the head of the Klan. So if Klansmen were blowing up buildings around Nashville, the Klan leader had given these actions his blessing. He knew about it ahead of time. So skip ahead 5 years, 65. J. Edgar Hoover was in the middle of another secret effort to discredit Reverend Martin Luther King, and he was fighting with the head of the Justice Department about it. Hoover sent a memo to Justice and to the president, arguing that his judgment about King was not compromised, and that the FBI had, in fact, been very successful dealing with extremist groups. Hoover wrote, in one southern state, for example, the governor on one occasion expressed his great concern and fear of an outbreak of racial violence because of the tense situation. But the head of the Klan organization in that state is our informant, and we have had him warn every member of his organization that he will not tolerate any violence in any form. As a result, we have been successful to date in holding Klan violence in the entire state to an absolute minimum. In 1967, Hoover said this state was Tennessee. He said, quote, in the early stages of Klan growth in the state of Tennessee, we were able to develop as a bureau informant the Grand Dragon of the United Klans of America, realm of Tennessee. Through this high-level source, we were able to control the expansion of the Klan. More importantly, we were able to discourage violence throughout the state. The Klan in Tennessee has not expanded to the proportions it has in other states, and its lack of success can be attributed to our highly placed informant. If this is true, then either the FBI knew about the plot to bomb Looby's house before it happened, since one of their informants was the Klan's Grand Dragon who would have had to approve the action, or they didn't, meaning their claims of great success at running the Klan were not true. At the least, the FBI didn't know whether their informants were involved, and they didn't want to know. At the most, they did know, and they let it happen. Either option is deeply troubling. And there is a third, even more horrific option, not one that I found any evidence for in the old FBI files, but it's not clear that they would have kept that evidence, that the FBI directed the Klan to kill Looby. I don't know which of these options is the right one, but the thing that explains the police and the mayor's approach to the investigation is if they suspected some level of FBI involvement in the bombing. And it appears that Nashville decided it couldn't risk taking on the FBI in the Looby investigation. So they just conducted an investigation that might sort out what happened, but would never bring anyone to justice. It's a tragic irony that the man who finally brought some modicum of justice to Black Tennesseans never saw it in regards to his own assassination attempt. But again, thinking of how Looby was targeted by extremists and how 65 years later, Jocelyn Correa Escalante was killed by one, I want to stress to you that this racist violence has a deep history and traditions that we don't know about, but the people who are targeting our city do. And it is to our detriment if we don't know our own history, be it the history of the heroes of the civil rights movement like Looby or the villains, because this history is still with us and still affecting us, and we can't stop what we don't know. Thank you. Natalie asked me to talk just a tiny bit about how I think this ties into, oh, I'm sorry.
I had some questions.
Sure, yeah, okay, well, let's do questions.
So you were going to go into talking about the genealogical aspect
Right.
of you wanting to write this book. But from what you just talked to us about, there was a lot of information there that you don't generally hear about what happened in those bombings. And there was a gentleman that you mentioned in the very first slide,
Jack Kershaw.
Kershaw. Tell us who he is. I mean, I think most people remember the Confederate statue that was on I-65. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay.
he was a sculptor, an artist, a bad one, to put it mildly.
What do you call it? It wasn't even stone. It was
This
fiberglass.
styrofoam.
I think it was fiberglass.
Yeah, it was, whatever it was.
It was ugly.
It was, yeah, I mean, honestly.
Did him justice.
If that is actually what Nathan Bedford Forrest looked like, his mom probably should have just like strangled him in the cradle.
Yeah.
I mean, his mom should have done that anyway, but I'm just talking like, you give birth to a monster, you gotta take it out.
Bad.
And who was he? Tell us how he was connected to
Right,
the
so.
KKK and.
Right. So Donald Davidson is this important professor at Vanderbilt. He was a member of the Fugitives, which were like a group of Southern poets. And then when they disbanded, that was like Robert Penn Warren, John Crow Ransom, other folks whose names are escaping me. So when that disbanded or fizzled out, he then became a member of the Agrarians, which included some other members of the Fugitives, but was more focused on creating kind of like a place for white Southern aristocrats to talk about how great the agrarian South is and how it needs to be preserved. And then after that kind of fizzled out by the wayside, he put together this Tennessee Federation for Constitutional Government that was him, many faculty and staff members at Vanderbilt, and some former Vanderbilt students, such as Jack Kershaw. So Jack Kershaw became Donald Davidson's right-hand man to help, because Donald Davidson was not going to go to the jail to bail out Klan members, but he would send Jack. Kind of the way that history is funny, Jack Kershaw was also William Edmondson's supervisor at the WPA, this is kind of a tangential story, but it does have to do with genealogy. So that statue that William Edmondson made of the boxer that recently sold for $750,000, art historians have started calling that, I can't remember a guy's name, but it is a black boxer who's bald, or who is not bald, but Edmondson called that statue Jack Johnson. And the reason that art historians have started calling it by this other name, whose name is escaping me, and I apologize, is because Jack Johnson was bald, and the statue is not bald. So I guess they've decided that Edmondson didn't know what he was doing when he called it Jack Johnson. But Jack Johnson was close to Looby's age. He was the best boxer in the world, and white people hated him because he was better at boxing than white people. So I want you to imagine when William Edmondson brings that statue to Jack Kershaw, who is, I mean, this is how vile a racist he is. He's like 60 years of racist terrorism he's helping. And Kershaw's like, that's a good statue. What's it called? And he says, Jack Johnson. You just know that Edmondson is daring him to say, well, that's not Jack Johnson, because that would prove that Kershaw was paying attention to a Black man who was the best at something that he was doing. I also think it's a very subtle dig at Kershaw, because it's like, here I am, the better sculptor of the two of us, telling you about a Black man who's a better boxer than any white guy, right? But done in such a way that I don't think that Kershaw picked up on it. Here's the other, and this gets into the genealogy portion. Edmondson had an uncle named Jack Johnson who made the papers twice. He had clearly a bit of a drinking problem. So first time he made the papers, the white papers, was because he got drunk and shot his hand off. Second time he made the papers was because he got drunk and got in a fight with 3 cops and was winning until more cops showed up. So I also think that there's a little play in that statue's name, because I think the boxer may indeed be Jack Johnson, William's uncle. So yeah, just a lot going on there. So Jack Kershaw is this kind of mediocre failed sculptor, mediocre eccentric, mediocre racist. So that's, yeah, who was one of the founders of the League of the South. So his mediocreness did not protect us from his evilness, unfortunately. Yeah, so one of the things that I used actually genealogy tools. I used Ancestry, I used old census records, used newspapers.com to find out about these people. And, one of the things that I find really kind of damning about white Nashville is that if you go into the civil rights room at the downtown library and you see they have those photos blown up great big. And they know every single Black person in those photos, even if it's a Black person way back in the crowd, because Black Nashvillians come in and they're like, oh, hey, my grandma went to church with that guy. What's his name? And identify everybody. And white Nashvillians will not say who those white people in those photos are. And it would be a very simple and there's so much that we don't know because those white people aren't identified. We don't know how many people were congregants at Reverend Stroud's church, although I suspect a lot of them were. We don't know, where in town they lived, where when they were showing up for these events, were they coming from the neighborhood or were they coming in cars? How are they finding out about this stuff? There's just a lot of history that could be very useful if some white person would be like, oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing, but that's my Aunt Georgia, that's her friend. There's just, sorry, Cecily. But it just would be incredibly useful. I also think that if we as a city really want to be in a spirit of reconciliation and regret over this time period, part of it will just have to be white people being willing to say, yes, I know those people.
Exactly.
Here are their names. So my feeling really, like, I know when I was doing this research and I was talking to, I went and sat at the NAACP headquarters one Saturday because I was trying to find elderly Black activists, and I figured that they probably would pop by to talk to Looby Wallace from time to time. And every single one of them remembered Looby, right? Because they had been in high school or college when this happened. So they remembered him, that he was a sharp dresser, that he still had a thick accent even after being in the country for 50 years. And they all, to a person, told me that they knew that everything Nashville said about, like, racial reconciliation or trying to be better about racism was, and excuse my language, but bullshit, because this case remained unsolved. And if Nashville really cared, then they would want to know why one of their own city council members was targeted. Like, that would just be, it's like, how are you supposed to believe that the city cares about an injustice that, like, some 13-year-old kid faces if they don't care about an injustice like one of their peers faced? So I don't have a good answer for that, except for that, yeah, that seems to be a very reasonable critique. And one of the purposes I had in writing Dynamite Nashville was trying to say, like, this is as much as I know. If you white people read through it and maybe you recognize something that you already knew that you didn't realize was meaningful, come forward. Like, come say, like, wait a second, actually, like, my great grandpa was the corrupt cop that Frank Hoochin worked with. Here's what I know about it is on the one hand a long time ago. On the other hand, it's not that long ago. The kids who desegregated Nashville schools in 1957, when Metro schools brought them back for the 60th anniversary in 2017, many of them brought their parents. Which I just find, like, it's not like, we are still in the lifetimes of people who are in these photos, who experienced this history. James Williams from Pearl, I really wanted to talk to him because I was like, here is a kid, and I was able to do some research into him, and looked like he had a very rough and kind of chaotic home life. It was risky for him to come forward, and it was going to bring attention to him and his family, who were not necessarily would not want the police to necessarily have focus on them. And he still came forward and tried to do the right thing. Like, the amount of people in North Nashville who had information about the Looby bombing, who were able, like, the watchman from Fisk had seen the bomber's car at Fisk for 4 weeks. Worse, as they were trying to break into one of the women's dorms.
Oh, Martha.
I know, right? I was just immediately like, oh, they're trying to take out Diane Nash. Holy cow. So, like, why would they be trying to get into a woman's dorm at Fisk? They were trying to take out Diane. I'm convinced of it. He shot one of them. Now, it's just with, like, a shotgun. But I'm like, I'm not a genius detective or anything, but if I were sincere about this investigation, and one of my witnesses said, that car that you saw 2 white guys in, I regularly saw 4 white guys in it. I saw it at Fisk for the past 4 weeks. And one of those guys has a butt cheek full of shot from my shotgun. Why wouldn't you go to the hospitals? Go to the doctors, just be like, hey, weirdly enough, has anybody shown up full of buckshot, right? Like, but that doesn't appear to have been done. So one of the really complicated things about this book is, all the white people are racist, but they also, like, a really interesting thing I found, and this was not just in Nashville, this was throughout the South, is that white police were indeed racist, and some of them were indeed like in the Klan or working with the Klan. But as this violence continued, they also started to become really embarrassed that they weren't solving the cases. And they started to get angry at the Klan for making them look incompetent. So if the FBI had been on the side of justice, there were fault lines forming in these groups that could have been pushed on a little in order to get answers. But of course, then we find out that the FBI is running the Klan. Just like the idea of Hoover saying the year before King is killed here in Tennessee, that he somehow managed to keep violence to a minimum is so crazy. Yeah, it's so gross. It just, like, I'll say doing this research too, and I've said this before, but it's true. My dad is a Methodist minister. When we were growing up, he was on the minority caucus for the ministers in his conference as a tool because the white conference would not listen to minority members. So my dad would go to these meetings and then say to the white people what the minority, it was very gross, but like necessary work. But so I would play with their kids while they were in these meetings, and every meeting, you know how like now when my parents get together with their friends, it's like, oh, my elbow hurts, or I've got this weird thing on my eye, or whatever. But they would start their meetings all like, well, when I was down in Alabama, and I would just roll my eyes because I'd be like, oh, here we go again. How, blah, blah. And I have had to call every single one of those people and apologize because I'm like, it was as bad as you said and worse. And they're all like, we didn't see you rolling your eyes. I'm like, well, thank you for saying that, but I don't believe it because I was young and snotty. But, like, it's been really humbling to just be like, wow, the kind of fundamental things that I thought were true about America, in fact, yeah, and then worse. And, also when I went to talk to the kids at Stratford, one of the things I shared with them is that, like, so many ordinary people in Nashville, like high school students, college students, all did this heroic thing to try to like make this city accountable and make it freer. And then they just went home and lived their lives, and we live among them. And some of them, of course, like we have recognized, but some of, we don't know the names of everybody in the giant silent march, and I think it's extraordinary that we get to live among these heroes, but also like, it also means that there are people who put their lives on the line and still, like, this wound, again, never solved, as if the city has not. So Mayor O'Connell, when this book came out, I sent him a copy. And then I was inadvertently in the one-person mayoral book club. So started getting texts like every 3 days. But like the third text I got from him is like, oh my gosh, what can we do? And I was like, Freddie, I don't know, everybody's dead. Dig them up, call up hell and be like, hey, you got John Casper down there, we need to ask him some questions. I was like, I think it's over, I think it's over. And so we get to the book launch, and I asked him if he would give the opening remarks at the book launch. And he's basically like, surprise, the police are reopening this cold case. I was like, all right, okay. So I'm both really excited because apparently the cold case detective is wrapping up his investigation and is about to report to the mayor what he's discovered. I'm also a little terrified. It feels like a final exam where it's like, am I right? Because if he comes out and is like, well, it turns out it was the Baptists, I'm going to be like, oh, I had the Baptists. They weren't even on my radar. But I do think that that is exciting. I also think that it is, I mean, it's not for me to say that it's too little too late, but the other thing that he asked of the police department, which I think is actually more meaningful, but it's less exciting because it's nerdy, is he ordered them to come up with a records retention policy, which they still, until he asked them, never had. So one of the drawbacks that I had in doing the research for this book is that Nashville had no police files from this era. Anything before 1963 is all gone. What I was able to find of Nashville police files, I found down in Bull Connor's archives. Because aside from being the epitome of evil, he was also
archives. Wow.
well at the Birmingham Police Department.
Yeah.
But he kept everything because he was, again, pardon my language, a petty bitch, and he had enemies. So he had big piles of receipts, basically. And in those big piles were a lot of Nashville, like correspondence with Nashville police, because Bull Connor was embarrassed that these bombings were happening and that he wasn't embarrassed if he knew who was doing them, but he was embarrassed that there were some that he didn't know who was doing them and he didn't know how they were getting done. So he was trying to solve some of them, especially because some of them were being committed by Asa Carter, who was his political rival. So there's a lot of like.
Well, I know I've got several questions. There's probably others in here. If you have questions.
Yeah, I have one question. Thank you. This is excellent. So I'm going to say that. I'm just interested. I noticed the history you gave. And again, we're going back to genealogy, as Natalie has said, we're linking this back. So the reason that these things are not so transparent is because these things continue. It's a collaborative on some level.
Right.
I think we're all aware of that. We can sense that when things happen, a lot of things just don't just happen.
Right.
Right. Were these individuals that you found, maybe were their families? You know, they say check the census, they say check the neighbors. I just wondered, did you check the neighbors? Were they kind of linked in that way, in some way? Because you sound like you were very aware of their relationship. They clearly were influencing one another.
Right,
and those things, they can happen sort of by accident, but generally there's circles.
Right.
So I wondered about that when you were speaking. I wondered if
these
were like descendants of maybe some of the older Southern families that upheld the slavery system.
Of course.
Curious.
Yeah, of course. And yes, of course, that was true. Especially like Jack Kershaw. If you're ever out so you know how there's like the regular Old Hickory, and then there's that weird part of Old Hickory that's like to the east that just like, you're like, we have to be in Hermitage. And if we're not in Hermitage, we have to be in Mount Juliet, but you're actually still in Old Hickory. Yeah. Jack Kershaw's like family plantation home is still there, and you can drive on General Kershaw Drive. So
I'd heard that name before.
Yeah. John Crow Ransom is named John Crow Ransom because his uncle, John Crow, was one of the founders down in Pulaski of the Ku Klux Klan. Mm-hmm. So these are like generational descendants, people who, that this is their legacy. They see this as a multi-generational fight, and their ability to like foster in others this belief that they should also get in on it is really depressing. But I think it's important. And one of the things that I think is important about like kind of giving this genealogy of terrorism is because they know it, right? Like, it all sounds, well, no, you know, not in these times, it doesn't sound crazy. A year ago, if I had said this out loud, it would have sounded crazy. But one of the things that it aggravates white supremacists is that if they are the superior culture in this country, where is their city? Where are their, like, where's their city with all white institutions, with all white culture? Where is the thing that proves that they are like the descendants of the genius of Western civilization? And they can't find it because the cities are where people who are like, you guys are scary, we're going to town. We all gather here to just be like, leave us alone. And so, you know, like, I'm preaching to the choir here, but obviously, you know, like, American culture is Black culture. And it's either directly Black culture or like it's Elvis sneaking into the clubs in Memphis and then coming out and being like, hey, I made up this new song that everybody in Memphis already knew. And I'm dancing this new way that all the cool guys in Memphis were already dancing. So it presents this problem of, so one of the things that I really appreciate about like the rise of the Black Opry and the way that we're talking about country music as, you know, an Afro-Celtic tradition is because they want Nashville. They see Nashville as white enough that they could take it, which is one of the reasons that like the Daily Wire is moving here and the white supremacists are trying to like, you know, get their enclave set up east of town here and stuff, is because this is a meaningful spot for them because this is where it's not where the Klan started, but it's where Nathan Bedford Forrest joined the Klan and kind of turned it into this national movement. And then it is where they started their kind of organized opposition to the civil rights movement. And they see it as a spot where, aside from like a few pockets of resistance, that they could be welcome. Which, you know, I hate to say it, but like, I don't know how wrong they are, which is also really frightening.
Going back to the genealogy, have you traced down these people, their descendants today?
Yes, some of them, yes. But part of this was, I'm sorry, this was really hard work. This was like hard.
How long did you work on the book?
I worked on it since 2017.
And did you talk, you know, did they talk about these people?
Some of them did, but one of the things that I found is that the people who I was looking at, you know, there's like racists. Like you can have, oh, Uncle Joe's a racist, I don't like him, we're not talking. But these are like bottom of the barrel people. There was so much violence and abuse in these families. Our not dealing with them, it wasn't like they went home and were like, hey, I'm not, I mean, you guys, the amount of sexual abuse, the amount of physical abuse.
Okay.
I found 3 different children who either succeeded in killing their racist parent or at least attempted it. So I did not push very hard to talk to descendants because I felt, you know, if they were willing to talk to me for the little bit that they were willing to talk to me, I was happy to have that information. But if you want to talk about like people with like deep generational trauma and a lot of like really conflicted, like some of the people I talked to, I was like, you don't need me, you need a therapist. Because like, right, like one person I talked to who is a virulent racist, but in talking to her, I realized her family is so terrible and evil. They let her 37-year-old neighbor basically buy her when she was 13.
Wow.
So her joining the Klan and becoming this terrorist was in fact in part about trying to find something in her family that she could experience as a positive thing. In a way, you know, like, well, yeah, they are terrible, or, you know, in this interpersonal way, but we are all fighting for the white race, you know? So like some of this stuff, I was just like, I am like just not equipped to like, and then some people, you know, so actually the person, their great niece contacted me and was like, I think she killed her mom. Which actually, now that I think about it, would make that a 4th family murder. But you know, I just like and I say this early on in the book, you know, that I learned these stories, but I didn't want the families to worry about me like telling them, is because like of all of the many reasons that not solving these crimes is horrific, one of them is that we let these violent, evil people go home where their kids had to deal with them.
Yes.
And they did not, you know, like, I guess what I want to say about that is that I just found a lot of horrific stuff. And the ways that people chose to make it through it was enlightening. It helped me understand some of the ways that this kind of violent racism perpetuates. You know, I think like you look at these racial terrorists now, I mean, even the kid, you know, the Antioch shooter was a Black Nazi. Like, you know, like, I mean, he's not the only, I mean, I actually found a lot of, I mean, even now, like, Enrique Torres is one of the most like violent, dangerous racists in the country. And you can tell by his name, he is not somebody that 50 years ago would have been considered white. But I do think that like what I've heard from police and other sources about the Antioch shooter's home life, you know, if it hadn't been, oh, I'm a Nazi, it would have been something else. Like this was a kid who needed an intervention very early on that he didn't get. And I mean, it really like one of the complicated feelings that I ended up coming away from this book is that it is true that at some point you do, no matter what, no matter how bad your home life is, you have personal responsibility for how you choose to react to that. And certainly tons of people have had horrific home lives and they've not become racist bombers or, you know, but on the other hand, it is just also hard as a person with a heart to do this genealogical work and see the newspaper stories of this horrific abuse and all this stuff and talking to people and hearing these stories and not feel like also like I just like it's heartbreaking, right? Because like with this woman I talked to who was, you know, sold to her neighbor at 13, what chance did she have? Like, and the thing that when I talked to her, you know, she's very smart, very articulate, but she had never gotten farther than 8th grade because she had to go be married to this, you know, child molester. And so I don't want to let her off the hook. She did a lot of evil and she, you know, tried to bomb the temple. She's not a good person. But on the other hand, you know, it's like we as a society just needed to step in at some point and we didn't, because back then it was like, well, what can you do? They ran to Kentucky and got married, I guess, you know, or whatever. But yeah, so I would say like, And I think that this is one of the things that I, like when I talk to white people about like racism and about like, one of the reasons that white people are racist is indeed because their own lives in some way are so terrible and they need to have something to feel good about or to feel that they have a purpose. And because we as white people aren't honest about that with ourselves, we're going to continue to perpetuate harm against both Black and white people. Like, our inability to realize how we perpetuate evil, I feel like, just leads to more and more and more harm. And that's, you know, one of the things when I think about enslavement a lot, you know, like, when you as a white person see a kid who is your own age in the backyard and you have grown up with them and you like them, right? They're your friend. Like, the only other 6-year-old within walking distance is this kid who lives in the backyard. And then your dad sells them, your best friend. There is not a good way for you to then have a healthy, loving relationship with your dad because you know your dad could do this horrific thing to you, right? So, but we have not, like, white people have been trying so hard to pretend that's, you know, and obviously I don't want to say like we had it bad too, that's not what I'm trying to get at, but like, we are not able to acknowledge that the kind of person who could sell a child away from his mother is not a good father, is not a good grandfather, is not a good role model, is not somebody that, you know, we might find compassion for that person in our hearts because that's our family and we love them or whatever, but we can't continue to pretend that you can be an enslaver and also be a good parent. It's just not possible. If you can do something that horrific to any child, there is no way for your own child to know except for like through self-brainwashing that you're not capable of that, of doing that to any child. So I think one of the toughest things about fixing racism in this country is that it means that white people need to confront the ways in which their own families betrayed them, as well as how they betrayed these people that they were, you know, holding captive.
That's a great segue, and I wanted to say you are the daughter of a Methodist minister, and it's going to have to happen in the churches, ladies and gentlemen. And we do have some race and faith groups here in Nashville. I know that, I don't know if she's on the call today, but we had a member who was a member of the race and faith team. They're part of the Methodist Church. So it's about healing from the terror. So as you were sharing with us today, white people are suffering just like Black people are suffering. You know?
I'm sorry.
Well, maybe not just like.
I didn't say just like. Well, it's a different kind of suffering. Well, it's a different kind of suffering. I see it as slavery was the original sin.
I think
of this country
groups are going through a similar experience, and how do you reconcile with it? Yes. You know, I have white friends, they weren't participants in slavery, but they didn't agree with it, but they're trying to reconcile with it. Just as Black people, I think we're trying to reconcile. I wasn't enslaved, I feel the effects of it, but how do we both reconcile with a horrible thing that's happened that we don't feel responsible for, because I was, you know, and they don't feel responsible for. So how do you find that reconciliation? But what I found interesting, I happened upon your book, Betsy, from a neighbor who was telling me, an older white gentleman who's, you know, in his 80s, telling me about all these negative things. He's always telling me about people in Nashville, specifically white people, and telling me like their great-great-grandpa was this horrible person. And, and I mean, he talks, but like you said, I think a lot of them don't. And so he's telling me about these people and their relationships. So I found it very fascinating to see, when you talked about the genealogy, is that a lot of these relatives are still, I'm not a native Nashvilleian, by the way, I'm from Chattanooga. So it's interesting to read the connections between some of these people with Chattanooga and Anniston, Alabama, where I have a lot of family. So it's very interesting. I've been in some of the most like horrific places, just didn't know it. Absolutely like tone deaf to it. But he was telling me about these relatives. So I think when you see things today like judges, police officers, people in leadership, just in general, when you hear people talk about, I hear their relatives speak. I hate to say this, but you can hear some of the history in them.
Yeah.
And it brings about understanding. So, when you talk about preserving history, it is because we speak from, our ancestry, what we've heard in our families, our grandmothers, great grandparents, and all of that. And I think they speak in the same tone. So it provides some understanding. But I think I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I love the book, and I don't have a lot of confidence in a resolution on this one.
Yeah, I honestly don't either.
Well,
People always gonna have.
I don't think we'll have any resolution necessarily in my lifetime because it's still too close. Like my neighbor told me, they know who did this. It's just too close to, I guess, the people that exist now because it hasn't been that long ago. So he was
like, for instance, to just give you a sense too, because Nashville was so small, right? Like,
yeah.
So I don't know if I should have put a slide of this, but there's a picture that ran in the paper of this little white kid scratching his head looking at the Hattie Cotton having blown up. And they have his name, which of course cannot call to mind at the moment. But his one uncle was in the Klan. Found him because they're doing a lot of like really stupid, complicated, like trading of properties. So his one uncle came up. And his other uncle was trying to solve these bombings. And at first I was like, oh, they know, right? The two uncles, these brothers know. But the more that I looked into the family histories and saw that there was like this split in the family, that like part of the family, hung out together and the other part hung out, and they was not a lot of like overlap. And then I was like, oh, maybe the police officer didn't know or was making an intentional decision not to know. But I was like, could you imagine being this kid right now? He's probably still alive. And if he is, he's like 70, maybe at most 70, to realize that like in your own immediate family is this Klan member and this cop. And it's like, the quote he has in the paper is like, why would anybody do this to us kids? Right? Which means that nobody in the family it's not just like, why would somebody? It's like, why would your uncle do this to you? And I'm like, there's no way. Like, that's a real hard thing to confront.
Can I just interject something?
Yeah.
That question has come up several times, and it actually answered the question for me. I'm a transplant from Mississippi Delta. I've been here about 20 years, former educator, K-12 educator. I work in higher ed. And actually, I work at Fisk currently, somewhat of a quasi-historian. I've been asking myself the question about how do you put enslaved people for 200 some odd years? And the answer is that because people are quiet and people tell themselves what they want to think and they hide information. And also, and I'm a reparationist, I follow William Derry out of Duke, Up From Here to Equality, wonderful book, I recommend it. I think because of the American tort system, because indemnification, as they say in insurance, another part of the issue is they're going to hide because there are people still living and they could possibly tie it to some monetary recompense.
Right.
So that's what you got to understand about America. America is slick smart. They know that there's a monetization part of this thing that happened historically. And they can tie it to people who still have property and things that you can get from them, because that's how the American system, tort system is set up. So it's really interesting that people have selective memory. And yeah, amnesia. Oh, I don't know. And they know that Uncle Jeb over there sitting in that chair right now on 2nd Avenue was in that group.
Yeah.
And they don't know one. And that's another question. Make that statement. I want to ask a question. Why can't, and you mentioned this, them little kids, little white kids sitting up there, oh, somebody put them on a newspaper, do a local flyer, say, does anybody know these people are so tall?
I know.
That's right. That's right.
Call 1-800.
We got AI.
I'm sorry. I'll say this.
People online may have questions.
Right.
This is gonna start an intense discussion here.
Right.
And we have, people who are, we're sharing our space here online, so, I want to, so were you?
No, I was gonna say, I actually have, okay, so you know Montgomery Bell of Montgomery Bell Tars, Montgomery Bell Academy.
And Montgomery Bell.
And Montgomery Bell, right? Rich, like beyond God, rich white guy. The Sweats are his descendants.
Yeah.
Not even kidding you.
How they, I thought, oh, now I get it.
They documented.
Because he never married, he just had slave women.
Miraculous, yeah, so, it is actually like, it was so apparent that he had Black children that even out in Cheatham County in the 1880s, when his daughter died, his Black daughter, they put him on her death certificate.
Wow.
Which you know that they did not have to do, they could have just put unknown. So the Sweats had this family story that they were descended from Montgomery Bell, which I was able to verify with death records, and there's the white descendants of Montgomery Bell, there's one branch that's in Belmead. But the second most successful family of descendants of Montgomery Bell is the Sweats. The rest of like the white descendants were dirt farmers out in, Dixon and Cheatham County, and many of them had to leave to go find work. The wealth did not transfer down very well, like after his white daughter passed. But so here the Sweats are, the second most successful descendants of Montgomery Bell. And Walter Sweat goes to the bank because he wants to build Sweat's restaurant. He owns the grocery store, he owns the gas station, and now he wants to build the restaurant. And the bank turns him down and straight up tells him, go ask your cousins. So he has to drive by the school his family money built into Belmead to ask his white cousins to give him money that he should have inherited in the first place. But they do, so he's able to start Sweats. But the thing that I learned that also blew my mind is that there is a Sweat on staff at Montgomery Bell now. He is the first Black descendant of Montgomery Bell to go to that school, and he now teaches there. So, like, they tried to cut the Black family off from legacy, and it didn't work, But again, like, to your point, when you're talking about like Montgomery Bell's level of money, having to split that up between all of the descendants, I mean, this is very complicated and nerdy, but like one of the things in like French America that leaked over into Spanish America was that you were expected legally to take care of all of your children.
Yes.
So that put, like after the Civil War, it put some like Louisiana Black families had a little money because their white fathers or grandfathers legally had to provide for them. Even if they were enslaved, they had to have a little money. And I am convinced, because there is this moment when Nashville is considering becoming a part of Mexico, because the United States cannot protect them from Native Americans. But Nashville by that point, and this is like late 1700s, has already been having this discussion about whether or not slavery is right. And they hold this big town meeting and they're like, slavery is wrong. We all know it's wrong. And not that they're not racist. I don't want to like let early Nashville off the hook, but their idea was to just take all the enslaved people and send them west to what was at that time Mexico, like across the other side of the Mississippi River. And they were like, and if they die before they get there, not our problem. And then they're like, but what are we going to say when people from out east show up and all of our slaves are gone? And they're like, we'll just say that they died. And they had this discussion, right? And then they decided that it would be too hard to try to like build a community out here in the wilderness without them. So then they're under this constant attack from Native Americans who are like, we told you not to move here. Get out. So they were talking about like, well, if the United States won't send troops to protect us, let's join Mexico because they will send troops to protect us. And I am convinced that one of the reasons that they didn't do that is because Mexico would have forced inheritance rights on all children of a white man. And I can't 100% prove that, but I really think that that was a part of their reasoning was like, oh crap, this would open, So, but I also think that that's like one of the things that made slavery so insidious was that everybody knew that like at least some of the enslavers were the parents of the people that they were enslaving. And so you're drawing those kinds of like, so you've got like not only the dynamic of being, a kidnapper and kidnap victim or an imprisoner and the victim of being imprisoned, but you also have all of this like family abuse and sexual abuse dynamic. And we know just from like the way that that plays out now that really messes with people's heads and it can make it a lot harder. You're like, I'm being mistreated, but I'm being mistreated by my dad. Makes it a lot harder, which is why I think, actually I was just talking this week at the Freedom Conference about this, that like one of the reasons that I think Tennesseans, like, did you know that Marcus Garvey came to Chattanooga like frequently? No, right? And then Looby was also from the Caribbean, but I think that one of the reasons, like, because those Caribbean plantations were so huge and the owners were often still back in England. So like Black people from the Caribbean didn't necessarily have the same kind of like screwed up family like thing also at play. So they could come here and be like, no, those guys are actually just jerks. Like, I don't care if you know that that's your grandpa. I don't care if he throws you a couple dollars, to make your life a little easier. We gotta chuck him, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to. This lady is a deep thinker.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. And I apologize.
She's touching on a lot of our themes of things that we're concerned about, and this we could talk, for a long, long time. I want to say thank you, first of all, Betsy. We do have copies of the book for sale, so we'll deal with that after the meeting. I wanted to see if there was anyone.
We do have a couple questions I'd like to just share from our online attendees. So Betsy, one of the questions that came up was, do you feel you've reached your goal in completing this work?
Yeah, actually, not to be like, I really wanted to know for sure how involved the FBI was.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get that, but I did figure, I think I've come as close as anybody has to being able to name who did the Hetty Cotton bombing and who did the JCC bombing
Mm-hmm.
and to outlining why we don't know who did the Looby bombing. So I do feel, like I would still love for some, elderly FBI agent to be like, okay, let me tell you what happened.
Yeah. Were you ever scared or threatened while doing your research for the book?
Yes,
Yeah.
I was scared all the time. My dad would regularly call me and be like, the FBI kills people.
Yeah, I just want to research.
Hey, Dad, relax. Yes, right, that's what I'm researching. When I went to talk to Gladys Gergenti, the terrorist, I thought I was fine. Like during our conversation, at the end when she made a joke about bombing my house, that I was like, oh man, I might have stepped in this wrong. And then at one point I found a knife in my tire, but I don't know if that was, because also like I write for the scene, people get mad at me. So I like was both frightened because there was a knife in my tire, but also I'm like, I kind of need you to leave a note that's like, this is because I hate your column, or this is because your book is annoying, or whatever, because I'm like, this is a message, but you didn't give me enough clarity to even know in which direction. I think it was probably like I made Matt Walsh mad at some point. It might have been his followers, but so yeah, if you ever want to know how to preserve evidence when the police are not that interested, put everything in a plastic bag and then put it in your freezer. So that later, as I was told, if you are injured or killed, we can revisit the tire slashing. But otherwise, I will say, like, those things are dramatic, but in general, I was really surprised by like how willing people were to talk to me, how like unthreatened I felt. And like when I spoke at the peace conference on Thursday, I encouraged white people, like, we are actually the safest people to be able to do this kind of research. So even if it is a little scary for us, like, especially if you're like, a white grandma, like there's a lot of like cultural conditioning that will let you get away with a lot before they're like, wait, we got to stop her. So I was encouraging people, like, use that privilege to your advantage. Because I know one of the reasons that I felt compelled to write this book was that I was able to get into spaces that I don't think other people could have. And I was able to knock loose things I don't think other people could have.
Yes, absolutely.
You have the thought, you have the encouragement to do it. You did it. And so not everybody, would do it. And so thank you. Thank you for heeding the call of justice. And I see that we will all benefit, each and every one of us, from this kind of taking responsibility.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other questions from our friends online?
No, and there's a lot of people saying, thank you for doing this work. Thank you for sharing this story. One of our participants was a first grader at Tom Joy when Hattie Cotton was bombed and remembers it. And, she said she had never really discussed it. Her family shielded her from the details, but she wishes she could have talked to them. She's, a white woman. So, she has that remembrance of this event. So,
well, and let me tell you, so my friend Carter is a native Nashvilleian, like for many generations, and he gave the book to his mom to read. And she sent me a note saying, Betsy, you're a very good writer. This is very good. I can't finish it.
Oh.
And I was like, oh. She's like, these people were my neighbors and I played with their kids, but my parents are dead. So I can't ask them if they knew that he was in the Klan. And she's like, and I don't know how to
Cause like if they knew he was in the Klan and probably involved in this stuff and they still let me play with his kids, I don't know how to live with that. And if they didn't know, and I was in that much danger from somebody who just, I also don't know how to live with that. And you know, and she's like 75 now, so I'm not like, you know, but I'm also like, yeah, there is gonna be, I think it is important to name names,
Mhm.
but I also think it's important to acknowledge that like a lot of people who were children during this time, this book will bring up questions
Yeah.
that the people who have answers to are no longer with us.
Yeah.
And that can be upsetting.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you.
This is a very powerful discussion, I think, more so than any other meeting that we've had since I haven't been part of this organization. I want to get a sense of how people are feeling at this point because we had some other
So let me
matters.
what I'll do is maybe Natalie just have a
Questions, what's
Yeah.
that?
But I just have a couple of announcements and then I'll save the rest for later. I think we've had like you said, very thoughtful discussion, and we can save some of that for a different time.
Okay, were there any other questions, any other comments? I want to recognize my colleagues from the Nashville City Cemetery Association who are here in our meeting today. I'm just feeling the love and the sharing the concern about recognizing our history in this city and trying to move forward in a more just way. So, were there any other questions? If anybody still has something that they want to express, I want to give you that opportunity.
Quick question in terms of, I recall learning from Carol Anderson, professor at Emory. She referenced or mentioned the fact that she talked about Tennessee history, that during the 1946 race riot in Columbia, that Looby was in the car with Thurgood Marshall, came down to help litigate the case.
Yeah.
That was great. They almost, some people followed them.
Right. So this is what happened. So from my understanding, what I've heard from people who say they were there or there-ish is that Thurgood Marshall was in one car and Looby and Maurice Weaver, who was the scrawny, scrappy looking white guy in the middle in that picture early on. But Maurice was from Chattanooga. And so he and Looby were going to follow Thurgood Marshall back to Nashville. But they were in one car because they were from Tennessee, and he was in another car in case he needed to like break away to go to DC or something. So the police pull over Marshall for drunk driving, supposedly. And they put him in their car. And Looby and Weaver, right? Because also remember, this is like Albert Williams was lynched only 10 years before this, right? And the circumstances of his lynching were that the Brownsville sheriff showed up at his house and took him away, and that was the end of him. So now the Murray County Police have this NAACP lawyer in their car, and they are headed off into the night. And so Looby and Weaver decide to follow. And so they follow them. And in some stories, it said that they appeared before a magistrate. But in other stories, and the ones that I heard, is just that at some point, I guess, the police realized if they were going to kill Marshall, that they'd have to kill Weaver, and that would bring attention. So they just let him go. But yeah, that basically like the defeat that the white establishment felt, because Looby and
Marshall and Weaver and the other lawyer, forget the other lawyer's name. The defeat that they handed them in this case, only like 2 people were convicted and both of them got off. Like everybody else was put on trial and were all set free. So when Looby started on the desegregation cases here in Nashville, Donald Davidson brought the prosecutor up from Murray County to try to let him redeem himself against Looby by like crushing school integration. But yeah, and like I tried to look into Weaver because I'm like, how does this like scrawny white guy from Chattanooga? But it turns out, I found this, so he was a lawyer for the CIO. So there was the AFL and the CIO before they were joined into one. And the CIO was integrated. So he was a lawyer for them, but he was also in Chattanooga, he was their best brawler. As I think we all know, the scrawny guys do tend to like kind of be the best in street fights. So they'd get in these battles with the AFL over what union was going to have the shop. And when the cops showed up, Weaver would put his suit coat back on, straighten up his tie, and be like, nobody in the CIO talks to anybody till I get to the jail. So he never got arrested for being a brawler because he basically like Supermaned them. Like, dude, how can you recognize me? I now have a tie and a jacket on. But so the reason that, and he was also a drunk and a womanizer, but the reason that they brought him on board is because he was fearless against judges. So anytime the judge said something and the team needed to object, they would let Weaver do it. So that was, and you know, like
Betsy, we're gonna invite you back. You don't have to come back.
I could tell a million stories. I'm so sorry to have come here.
We're starting something. Now, we have some members of AAHGS Nashville who are part of the race and faith team for the Methodist Church, United Methodist Church. And I don't know if any of them are on the call today, but this is something that I hope that we can continue to contribute to a reconciliation that is so necessary. I wanted to just say briefly, and then I'm going to say, pass it to you, Tania, to go ahead and wrap us up, and we can go out. So the books again are available. 2 things that I wanted to say. You mentioned the people who were the little people. Here in Nashville, we always want to think about, and my friend Betsy Thorpe from the City Cemetery makes this point. Here in Nashville, we have, you know, all these HBCUs. We've had the Diane Nashes and everything. All the people who sacrificed in order to make a movement happen, they should be recognized. The little people that could, or well, you could say that, or you could say the foot soldiers.
The regular people.
The regular people. The foot soldiers. I mean, so there was a movement, and there were hundreds of people that were involved. Let's carry that conversation into our next meeting, talking about the foot soldiers, because those are going to be our brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers and cousins and uncles. And some of them are still living. A lot of them not gone on. But those of us who are researching our families, find out who your ancestors were who were involved in the movement. If they stood up and risked their lives, recognize them. Okay, Tania?
Yes. So I just want to share. So again, Betsy, thank you for your presentation. Very important conversations to have. For our online attendees, the digital handout does have a link to Betsy's book. And then, of course, as Nally was saying, if you're there in person, we have them in person. And Vanessa, again, thank you for sharing your family story and the research that you've done. I just want to close us out with a few announcements. And the first one being, let's see if I can get my slide to advance. So Betsy has shared that she gave this presentation at the Nashville Conference on African American History and Culture. And I want to just give a great thanks to Carmen Johnson, Edvin Sang, and Natalie for representing AAHGS Nashville at that meeting. It was on Valentine's Day on February 14th. And this is an annual conference. So in the digital handout, there's links to videos of this year's presentations. You can watch all the presentations online, as well as links to a few of the past years. Extremely important to watch these presentations, learning more about African American history and culture in Nashville. Very impactful group of presenters. So I just wanted to acknowledge our AAHGS Nashville members who were there and just share with everyone, please do see this as a resource for your ongoing learning. They also do publish a book, Profiles of African Americans in Tennessee, and the digital copy of that book is available online to read. You can also purchase a physical copy. So a lot of good information about the history of African Americans in Nashville and throughout the state. Our next meeting will be April 5th. So we invite you to come back and join us at Fort Negley for that meeting. We will also have an online option. We will announce the topic soon, but we want you to at least save the date. So Saturday, April 5th, we will meet again. And I do want to share briefly in that meeting a recap of Roots Tech, which is, if you aren't familiar with Roots Tech, the largest genealogy conference in the world. It's happening March 6th through 8th. It's physically located in Salt Lake City, but there's a very engaging online component, lots of information to help us as we're exploring our ancestral origins. And this year they have done a particularly good job in pulling together a group of presentations and resources to aid in our African American research. And so in the digital handout, I think I did put the link to, yes, African American resources at Roots Tech. That's happening next week. So we'll do a brief recap of some of the highlights from this conference if you're not able to participate in the online sessions. It's 3 full days of online activities. So we encourage you to check that out. And there will be many, many webinars and sessions you can attend to continue in your learning. So with that, I just want to thank everyone who has come in person and thank everyone who's come online. We're very appreciative of your time. And we have much more conversation to continue to engage in. So thank you.
Thank you so much.